Again, it's really nice that we can connect, and I'm very grateful to the folks at the Bloomington Early Music Festival for facilitating this connection and conversation, and in conjunction with Music of the Regiment's virtual concert at the Bloomington Festival later this month. Although I guess if people are listening to this conversation, it's going to happen, today.
No.
Um, but thank you, Professor Gleason, for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Um, I don't know if it's maybe a natural place to jump in. I think the theme of the festival this year, being reflective on America 250 and commemorating 250 years of independence and everything that that means as far as what our musical cultural roots are and you know, where we were and where we are today. It's maybe not so conventional for people to associate band music with a 250-year American tradition. But I think I'm speaking to the right person who might who might
Yes.
really be able to make that connection. And I just wanted to maybe start by getting your thoughts and feelings on what America 250 means in the context of band history and what this really means for our cultural identity.
Yes. Well, thank you. Taking a look at, so it's your ensemble that's playing, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Music of the Regiment is a group that I founded a few years ago with Dr. Chris Troiano. We specialize in martial music of the 18th and 19th centuries.
And from what it looks like your instrumentation is basic harmony music. Uh, Pairs of woodwinds. Is there a pair of horns in there too?
There are, yeah. I mean, we're fairly variable. So, I mean, one of the things that we are trying to do here is kind of show the broad spectrum of what military music can be. So, the program that we're presenting today is two clarinets, two horns, two bassoons, very much in sort of a standard British, French, German, American military band formation of the 1770s and 1780s. But we do everything from that to full 1820s with serpent and ophicleide and keyed bugle and all that jazz.
Good for you. Well, that whole harmony music thing with paired woodwinds and paired with addition of horns, as you mentioned, that was the whole deal for everyone.
Mhm.
And I talk a little bit about that in my books. My the specialty of my books really has to do with cavalry music, and harmony music is part of that piece. But of course, cavalry really started with trumpets and kettle drummers on horseback, and the woodwinds were actually added. So your instrumentation is really mainly for infantry rather than cavalry, which you probably know. Um, I write about the first bands. I can't remember where I write about this. I joke with I'll say something to my students, then I'll mention something that I wrote, and then I have to add the qualifier. At least I think I was the one who wrote this. So, um, the first mention, I wonder if it's in my Sound the Trumpet, Beat the Drums, talking about the first military band, documented military band in the United States. I think that's in my first chapter of Sound the Trumpet, Beat the Drums. Um, and I'm wondering if it has to do with it's actually a celebration in the colonies of something that happened in Britain, and now
Yeah, actually, I did stumble into this.
oh good.
Yeah, it was the 1717 is it 1717 somewhere thereabouts. Again, now I'll put the qualifier on that. I'm trying
Yeah.
to remember something that I read. But it was I believe, sort of celebrations of the coronation of George the First and or the death of Queen Anne, and it was
Oh,
an
that's
oboe
right.
band in New York City.
Beautiful.
So it's one of these, to your point, like we have these connections, this band music connection predates American independence. I mean,
Oh, absolutely.
I think one of the things that I find personally fascinating about it is when we're surveying musical life in America throughout the 18th century. I think there's an argument to be made that the largest, say, professional showing of musicianship is actually coming from military bodies and not necessarily civilian enterprises.
Absolutely. An article that I wrote for Music Educators Journal in 2016 or so, the abstract, and I think the first sentence in there is the Department of Defense employs some 6,000 musicians yearly, and that's everyone from all of the service bands, but as well as the National Guard and so on. So that means the Department of Defense is the largest employer of musicians in the United States. And
Yeah.
that's a major statement, and it is true.
Yeah, and it's something that we just, I think, naturally wouldn't make the connection for, in a climate where, of course, we always are trying to seek more public support for music. There's actually, if you just look in a different direction, you'll find enormous public support
Right.
for
Yes,
music.
yes. When I was in the Army in 88 to 91 at the School of Music in the Naval Amphibious Base, there was a horn player who had actually come back. He had been in the Air Force. He was out for a while, and he was coming back as a musician with the United States Army. I,
Mhm.
I think I think the Air Force. I shouldn't say this because I actually don't know. I'm going to guess. I think the Air Force does not take. You can't transfer from one of the other services into the Air Force.
Hmm.
You can with the others, and that's sort of a quirk, but sort of not. Um, And I think he actually couldn't leave the Air Force and then come back into the Air Force. So he left and was coming back into the Army. And that's all beside the point anyway, and I apologize for that. My point is he had actually served in the Bicentennial Band. And the Bicentennial Band was a combination of Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines. I don't know if Coast Guard was part of that or not. And they took I'd like to think that he took some of their top musicians, put them in a band together, and they traveled. I don't know if it was the entire year of 1976 or not.
Mhm.
And so my service time to me, even though it was 30 some years ago, it seems like it was yesterday. And that young man, who was probably my age, had served with some of the top musicians in the world with the Bicentennial Band, and that's already 50 years ago.
Right.
And now here we are, and you're asking a fabulous question of the 250 part. I'm having a hard time no, I'm having a hard time grasping that it's actually 250 years because I I graduated in 1976, so it's my 50th anniversary, my reunion this summer. And the idea that we're already 50 years past that, I find I'm having a hard time with that.
Yeah, that's fair. It's actually really related to this. One of the sources that I've found particularly inspiring in my work is Raoul Camus's book on military music during the Revolution, which was published in 1976. And I know that there are some exceptions to this, but to paint with a really broad stroke here, there
Yes,
hasn't really been a tremendous amount of research between then and now published in a compilation like that that helps fill in the blanks, right?
right.
So, I mean, and I've spoken to, Dr. Camus a few times about his work and, his relationship with that work. And it does sort of feel, even in terms of scholarship, we blinked and 50 years has gone by and there still are a lot of questions to
Yes,
answer, right?
yes, yes. Um, uh, well, you probably know in Sound the Trumpet, Beat the Drums, I do cite Dr. Camus, and he has been a tremendous support for me for decades. And my work, because and I make this statement in several of my writings, as well as in my book that's coming out in January, which is actually a prequel to Sound the Trumpet because it traces the history of cavalry music from the Crusades to the 20th century. And that one is Cavalry Trumpeters and Kettle Drummers, The Birth of the Mounted Band. Indiana University Press is publishing it It's supposed to come out in January. But I bring that up because to have really done military music history justice, I should have written 1,000-page book on cavalry and infantry, and 1,000 pages is too much, and for many reasons. So consequently, even though I fill in the blanks of cavalry music stemming from the Revolutionary War, and I know Dr. Camus is very happy that I've done that. The infantry with harmony music, the bands on foot, that's a whole ball game that really needs to be studied. There are a few. David McCormick, Dr. McCormick, has that name come across with you? He was a tuba player with the U.S. Army Band back in the 1950s, did a dissertation on the U.S. Army Band, but we need many more. And now I'm trying to think of who did one on the Marines, but anyway,
Yeah, I think Dr. Proksh, I'm blanking on a first name right now. There's a good series of essays published on the early Marine Band and competition between the Marine Band and the Italian Marine Band and sort of the interesting saga
oh yeah,
of officer patronage versus public support and which Marine Band was the real Marine Band. But a lot of this, even a lot of the infantry research seems to, and I think this is a general trend in broader military studies anyway. The Napoleonic Wars and sort of the trends of the 1790s and after eclipses a lot of what comes before it. I mean, to use again maybe a really clean year but a clumsy marker. There really is a world of the ancien regime and a post 1789 sort of cultural moment. And the work that's been done on the West Point band, the work that's been done on the Marine band is it's all it's all sort of what I would consider maybe a chapter two or chapter three of America's band history, and the chapters two and one and preface still kind of live with Dr. Camus's work.
right, yeah. Um, yes, I agree. And do you know, you might know Jill Sullivan's book, Bands of Sisters,
Mhm.
and it's on the U.S. women's military bands during World War II.
Okay.
And it is a stunning read because she uncovers another piece of the puzzle. Uh, Men were going off to war, and who was going to play in the bands, the major U.S. bands in the United States? Well, they she interviewed, I don't know, 70 some women who are now, many of them are gone. Well, most of those women were conservatory university trained. The bands were exceptional. And a reason I bring this up, the publisher is Scarecrow Press. And the original idea was Raoul Camus's daughter, whom whose name I don't remember, was going to serve as the editor for a series of banned books with Scarecrow Press. And Jill Sullivan's, I think, is the only one that was done because Camus's daughter, they let her go or
Mhm.
some. And this isn't very long ago. This is in the last 10, 12 years.
Okay.
But it's a fabulous, fabulous read. And it was a fabulous idea that Scarecrow Press had and that didn't materialize.
Well, I hope that they're tuning in, and I hope that they reconsider whatever decision derailed that project. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's a point really well taken that again, I think a lot of people might not immediately consider, historically speaking, when we're thinking of military bands. But the caliber of training for a lot of these musicians was quite high, right? And as you cited with, military bands in the early 20th century, these women coming from conservatories. I mean, this is an echo of the Paris Conservatory in the 1790s, right?
Absolutely.
It's sort of exactly the same thing, just 100 years earlier. I mean, that institution was founded to uh, to feed regiments bands, right?
Absolutely.
Um, and actually, I don't know. I mean, this would be an interesting. It's an interesting question that I haven't asked. But are you familiar with any with what America's first military music school was, or if they're
Yeah, yes. Um, it's 19th century. I
hmm
talk a little bit about it. I think I talk about it in Sound the Trumpet. There was a U.S. Army band school on Governor's Island, uh,
right?
in the harbor in New York. Um, that might that might be the first.
hmm
Uh, Musicians with the U.S. forces. It's interesting during the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe, especially part of the Holy Roman Empire, where trumpeters and kettle drummers were part of the Trumpeters and Kettle Drummers Guild.
hmm
Well, they were ferociously trained to the point where they couldn't take students unless they had served, uh, had apprenticed for 7 years. Well, they were pretty good after that time. And by the time military music comes to the United States, a lot of it is a crapshoot.
hmm
There were a lot of bands that did attract good musicians, but I make a statement in the Sound of the Trumpet, Beat the Drums. Some of the early buglers during the Civil War in that era had never played an instrument before,
hmm
and they kind of just jumped in and figured it out, and and we went from there. There are actually several European, to this day, traditions that still the mounted regiment in Denmark, outside of it's not in it's in the town of Næst. I think it's in Næstvet, or at
hmm
least that's where it used to be. So those it's a small mounted regiment. It's only like nine trumpeters. I'm not sure if they're playing trumpet or bugle now, and one kettle drummer. Well, they've been drafted, conscripted, and they've never played an instrument before. So I've actually attended those auditions. And the auditions simply are, can you buzz on this mouthpiece and this instrument? And you get extra points if you can get something in the harmonic. If you can actually change pitches, you get that's even it's even better.
That's amazing.
And that's probably how much of the US started. And little by little, they realized that we should probably train our musicians and so on. Uh,
Yeah.
Felix Vinatieri, George Custer's Seventh Cavalry bandmaster, he was Italian conservatory trained and was
hmm
a fine musician, and most of his music band men were as well.
Yeah, it's and everything that I've been looking through with, 100 years earlier during the American War for Independence, there were people like Thomas Proctor and his artillery band that he was able to enlist European musicians, and some of which seem to have been, British soldiers who were either captured or crossed lines. But then there are people like Christian Febiger, the colonel who I've built this program around today, who tried to do that, who tried to recruit, Hessian or British musicians with little success, and then eventually ended up quite proudly, he writes quite proudly that he was able to train six Virginian men to, or eight Virginian men to actually become this band of music that he claims is equal to any band in this country, right? I mean, he writes it to his friend, and then he also reuses the line to George Washington in a letter from 1782, where he's basically trying to petition to like get some reimbursement because he's put a lot of his own money into the project. But it's an interesting kind of early example of how these American colonels were going about creating bands. It was either you scout the talent or you create the talent. And in Pembriture's case, even when he was creating the talent, he hired two German musicians in Philadelphia to train his band of Virginians. So the thing that I also find really interesting about early band culture in America is it's in really in your face example of cross-cultural
Yeah.
connectivity, right? I mean, this isn't Americans trying to be Americans to be different. This is Americans trying to really find their place in the world by looking around them and seeing these cultural examples and embracing them.
Yes.
Um, I mean,
Yeah.
also, I'll just quickly say for people listening to the program, it's interesting to reflect on the fact that the first Fourth of July ceremony in 1777, the first Fourth of July celebrations in 1777, were ornamented by a Hessian band of music that was captured at Trenton in 1776. So, the lines of who gets to be American and what it means to be American and to celebrate independence are blurred even at the time.
That's beautiful.
Hmm.
Beautiful. Um, and it's a good reminder that um, we are not complete in ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah.
And your take on hiring Hessians and so on, and that really stems from, well, I want to say mainly it stems from Britain, the Royal Artillery especially in the 17 and 1800s. They were hiring German and Italian bandmasters, and they were civilians, and they didn't even pretend to give them military rank. And they simply went and found the best bandmasters they could, and big deal if we're going to go to war with that particular country in a few years. That was immaterial. Uh, Speaking of which, Seventh Cavalry Band in the 1800s with Felix Venetieri. I mentioned this in Sound the Trumpet because maybe half of his band were born in Europe. Uh,
Hmm.
so that was still happening, and a lot of them simply joined the army because they could play their instruments,
Right.
which is actually still happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, I think everybody probably listening in here knows a military musician. I mean, this is the right kind of crowd that would be
Right.
familiar with people
Yeah.
who have decided to, take that career
Yeah.
trajectory, and they're incredible jobs, and the musicianship in these ensembles is absolutely incredible. And
Yeah.
the amount of people that I increasingly know who are even serving in foreign military bands who I went to school with here in America is incredible. So it continues to be this cross-cultural transatlantic trade of musicianship.
Yes, absolutely. Um, what did you were quality of musicianship? A lot of times, um, well, often, uh, people will regard the Washington bands in the U.S. as top-notch, and they are. They're
Mhm.
fabulous. But there are plenty of musicians in the 50 some other bands in the US who those musicians who could easily qualify for the Washington bands. There is just not a room enough for everyone, or they don't want to leave whatever they're doing, and so they stay with the other bands. Uh, with When I was with the 298th Army Band in Berlin, it was a fine group. I was a little unusual because I was 30 some years old and I had a master's degree.
Mhm.
But I sat next to 18-year-olds who had just graduated from high school who could have been playing in any jazz, show band, rock band in the country. And I was 12, 13 years older than some of these young men and women, but I was certainly no better than they were. And that's how it was across everything.
Yeah, and just like make the historical connection, I think this is absolutely something that we see going back into, I mean, we can stop at the 18th century. You could keep going back and back and back and back, right? But
Right.
the not to be boring and redundant and continue to say, well, the interesting thing to me, but another interesting thing to me about investigating this band repertoire and this band history in particular is when, as a clarinetist, when I look at every sort of great clarinetist of the early 19th century, every virtuoso, whether it's, people like Heinrich Berman and his colleagues like Croussel or Hermstedt, all of these figures started their musical lives in military bands as
Indeed.
kids, right?
Yep.
As like 14, 15, 16-year-olds who were trained in the band and then went on to champion the most virtuosic, challenging repertoire that defined at least my instrument
Yep.
for, until today. Um, and so, again, it's a point really well taken that these institutions today and historically are powerhouse organizations of fostering and supporting expert musicianship and, sort of technical and musical interpretation of the highest caliber. And it's just exciting to make those connections. It's exciting to see this as a continued
Yep.
tradition.
Indeed. Indeed. One of my, and I don't know that I'll ever come to terms with this. I think all military musicians have some kind of multiple personality happening because the idea that, okay, we're trained musicians. However, on Thursday morning, we're all going to the field because we're gonna work on our foxhole digging skills and our chemical warfare skills and our rifle range skills and so on. And you simply have to switch.
Hmm.
We had a clarinet player we had a clarinet player in Berlin, Perry Ralston, E5 sergeant, fine clarinetist. And he knew more about uh, weaponry and warfare and so on. I'll also mention Dan Herman, one of the finest trombonists I've ever worked with. And they could cross easily from one personality to the next. I was not that good at that, but some of them were, and more power to them.
Yeah, it reminds me again of some of this research that I've been doing. I did a few years ago. I spent a lot of time with Timothy Olmsted and Colonel Webb's band of the Connecticut Regiment of Infantry during the Revolutionary War, and they were present at the battle at the Siege of Newport, the failed American French siege of Newport. And one of the things that I found really remarkable in perusing the pension records are these accounts of these from one particular bandsman whose name I can't remember right now, but of him actually saying, we were spending time digging trenches with the rest of the infantry. It was even though, and this is like a whole other half an hour conversation, even though the lines were theoretically more clear in the sense, and actually also very blurry in another sense. These musicians who had a sort of designated function as, I mean, first and foremost, they were enlisted as fifers and probably should have been fifing instead of playing the clarinet or horn or bassoon. They were also being called to actually dig siege lines and trench lines. And of course, when it comes to field musicians, we have plenty of examples. I'm reading Rick Atkinson's latest volume of the history of the Revolution, and he cites several examples of fifers, being given muskets and saying, "You got to, this is your job now."
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so, I would say this is probably the clearest difference between life as a civilian musician and life as a military musician is particularly after the true institutionalization of military music with the form
Yeah.
of the Marine Band in 1798. You have, you know, musicians as soldiers, soldier musicians, instead of, to your point with the Royal Artillery Band, civilian musicians who are wearing uniforms.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Um, that reminds me. So when I served in 88 to 91, when I was at the School of Music in Norfolk, I remember at least one euphonium player who had been in the army long enough that he had served in Vietnam.
Mm,
Well, he proudly wore a Purple Heart
hmm.
because musicians in the army are were soldiers, and that's all part of it. Ross Mazer was a horn player with us in Berlin. He was also old enough to have served in Vietnam, and he remembers playing "The Pines of Rome" by Respighi in the morning in Saigon, and in the afternoon going out on search and destroy missions in the jungle.
Wow.
Well, that's a whole different that is
Yeah.
a whole different ball game. Um, Also during my time, that's also the time of the first Gulf War.
Hmm.
And by the time that the Gulf War ended, there were 8 U.S. Army bands in Kuwait alone, because that's how the Army works. You go if a unit goes, you take the band with you. It's just part of it. And I served with Jeff Harper, who retired 5, 6, 7 years ago as a first sergeant tuba player, and he left our band to join another band because each of the each of the units within the larger unit during warfare was supposed to be at 125%. So they would just take a look. The army would just take a look at the numbers. We need the military occupation specialty. The number euphonium was O2 Charlie. I can't remember what a tuba is, but they would see, oh, we need so many of these, and it didn't matter what that job was. We just need so many of these.
Hmm.
So I remember standing in line with 200 other soldiers in Berlin making out my will with Jag because we didn't know if we were headed for the Gulf or not. Fortunately, um, Washington pulled the plug on that, and instead of heading for the Gulf, headed for the University of Iowa because I had a PhD waiting for me.
Yeah. Sounds I think I can comfortably say that it feels like it really worked out.
It,
Uh,
it worked out. Yeah, yes, it did.
well, unfortunately, we're coming sort of to the end of our conversation here, and the only reason I say unfortunately is I'm just having a great time musing on this stuff with you. I don't. I mean, I think this is as good a place as any to leave it. But do you have any final remarks you would want to leave us with as we think about military music and its role in our history and identity and what 250 means to us?
A good question. The main thing is I'm tickled that you're actually doing that. You have this ensemble. That's fabulous. Where are you based?
We're based all over the place, really. I'm in New York, and our horn players are in Raleigh, North Carolina. We have someone in Richmond. I mean, it's as period instrument specialists,
Yeah,
we're few and far, not few and far between, but we're all over the place, and we got
yeah.
to pull each other together when we want to play.
Yeah,
So,
good for you. I'm tickled that you're doing that. You're reenacting in the best way possible. Other than that, I'm not sure I've got. I'll be interested to see and hear this Bloomington festival as well. I'm honored to be at least some kind of vocal part of this, and I'm tickled to be talking with you.
well, 100% likewise. And yeah, thank you so much to the folks at the Bloomington Festival for inviting us to come together and speak. And I hope that this conversation has been interesting for everyone and maybe inspires folks to go out and dig up some band music. I think there's no better thing. There's no genre that can inspire as much joy, I think, as band music, actually.
Indeed, and as we know, thousands of communities across the North America for hundreds of years, it was a band that they heard, not an orchestra, and many of them were military bands or town bands that had been military bands.
Yeah. So I guess this is a call to action for everyone to go dig up your clarinet that you played in sixth grade and dig out your euphonium or dig out your trumpet and go join a band.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because there are tons of waltzes, dances, marches, and so on
Yeah,
waiting to be played.
absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much and enjoy the
Alrighty.
program.
Thank you so much already.